Hi, everyone. I'm Crystal, and I host the podcast Alternative Interests with my best friend, Elle. We're Washington natives that love true crime, the supernatural, and all things weird, dark, and spooky. Join us every week as we take turns sharing our own twists on the garbage humans that commit crimes, or a paranormal story that we have been obsessing over. Whatever topic we cover, this show is sure to capture all of your alternative interests. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hello and welcome, agents and new listeners. If you wish to stay up to date with the latest episodes or any news you might have missed, please follow us on Twitter or Instagram or join our Facebook page. If you'd like to join in or start in some discussions with other agents, we have a Discord server available to everyone. We also have our episodes up on YouTube, so please consider subscribing and share with your friends. Thank you for your time. Now let's get into this week's case file. Hello everyone, and thank you for joining in on this week's episode of Files Obscura. I hope you're doing well, as we are. We are very busy, very tired, but I'm excited. We decided to go with something a little bit simpler, but still kind of fun to talk about. I looked into some kind of unethical experiments carried out throughout the years, and with this being the US, there is a bountiful amount to choose from. So today I picked one that I felt doesn't really get talked about as often as it should. So today we're going to be covering the Tuskegee Syphilis study. This is a very unethical, a very messed up study that led to an experiment that happened out of the States and lasted for 40 years and it was riddled with problems. Before we get into it, we have a few things to cover. Of course, today I'm joined by Vlad.
Hey there.
Which is kind of nice, since we got our 6-month special coming up in a couple weeks. It's kind of nice that we kind of go back to our roots where it was just you and I. Make things a little bit easier.
I agree.
Yeah. Because we've got a lot of stuff going on in the background that I wish I could talk about. And me being a loudmouth, I'm going to shut up right now before I spill some beans.
Yeah.
But of course, there's all the stuff in our personal lives. Like me, I'm moving in with one of our new co-hosts, Gabby. She's going to be one of my roommates. She's a longtime friend of mine. So we're going to go ahead and be moving in and setting up a recording booth in my room. I've already had it mapped out and everything. So hopefully the quality will get much better in a couple of weeks.
That'd be awesome.
I know that's kind of been a big concern of ours, especially for me. It's been one of the biggest pet peeves because it's not been something I've been able to control. But once we move in, hopefully it will no longer be an issue. We are waiting on some better mics soon. But of course with COVID, shipping on everything is pretty much slowed to a crawl. So it's just a waiting game at this point. There's new job opportunities that I'm also dealing with, scheduling conflicts. And so it's been hard, but it's been worth it. Is ultimately the point I'm getting at. But that's pretty much what's been going on my end. What's been going on with you, Vlad? I know you've missed a couple episodes here and there in the past month.
It's mostly just work. I've been really busy.
I know, because you work 2 jobs.
Working 2 jobs, that's right.
Yeah, so it takes a toll. I know how that's like.
Yeah.
To do this, I had to choose not to work 2 jobs, and have a comfortable paycheck. But for me, I feel it's worth it right now, because like I said, we've had a lot of good opportunities I can't wait to tell people about, and it all came from, just the dedication we've been able to provide so far. And, and a lot of that has been with help with you, Cece, and everyone else who's been helping with the podcast and been encouraging, because we've been seeing some really good growth lately. It's been inconsistent, I'll be honest, but in general, it's still some really good growth, and it's showing a lot of promise, and I'm happy about it. I'm really excited to see where we can take this. I'm really curious to see where we'll be in the next 6 months,
I completely agree. I'm looking forward to it, too.
Yeah, so without further ado, let's get into today's episode. So the Tuskegee Syphilis study was, like I said, a really unethical study that did lead to an experiment that happened outside of the States, which we'll cover briefly in this, just because a lot of the research that went on with it was virtually identical to what we'll cover. But as always, with tradition, we play 2 truths and a lie. So we got some information pulled out of this, and I tried really hard to make it really confusing. And I like, that's not the right word. I had a word, it was on the tip of my tongue, and I just lost it. But the lie I made is very close to what actually happened.
All right.
So I think you're going to have a hard time. It's misleading. So I think you're going to have a hard time.
Okay.
But let's get into it.
All right.
First statement. When I looked into research about this syphilis study and everything, of course, I looked into the history of syphilis. I looked at some early treatment options. I looked into see what was available, what people believed at the time, and long-term effects of these medications and stuff. One of the first what's the word I'm looking for? I wrote it down and I can't read my own handwriting. One of the first treatments that we found that showed a significant amount of help in reducing and even curing syphilis in patients was known as the 606 formula. And this is I have a hard time saying this word, organoarsenic compound that was first used, like I said, to treat syphilis. This came out in the 1910s, but it was very toxic still. You're using arsenic, and a lot of people would get arsenic poisoning due to the treatment process, or even being near some of the base, compounds that were used to make the medicine. And it gets its name due to the unique design of the arrangements of the elements, hence the 606 formula is kind of came the term used to describe this. I believe its original name was, I wrote it down somewhere. It was like, it was similar to like aspartame, but it was like arsenitane or something like that. But yeah, that was one of the first treatment the first treatment options that people had for syphilis. But, it had mild, effects to actually cure things, and it had a high toxicity rates.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds, well, I believe it.
Yeah. So the next statement, I looked into, the size of the study. You got to have a pretty large sample size to be able to have an accurate examination of whatever you're studying. So when I looked into the numbers, I found that the study, when it first started, had 600 patients. But over the 40 years that this went on, it grew to have over 2,000 patients in the end, a lot of them who died, during the study because, of course, they went untreated, and we'll discuss why as we get into the episode.
All right.
Any thoughts?
Not so
no,
far.
Just kind of waiting.
I'm waiting for the third one.
All right.
Seeing what I think.
So the third statement kind of deals with those in charge, because when I looked into the people who had the biggest impact, this is whenever I found out the part of the story I didn't know, because I learned about the Tuskegee study in high school. But the part they didn't tell us was that a lot of the people in charge would later expand their research into actually going to Guatemala and infecting people. And the reason for this was because there was actually no civil or ethical laws in place to save people in Guatemala. So a lot of people their well-beings weren't being taken into consideration. So these researchers would go down and just intentionally infect a bunch of people and just see what happened, kind of the same way that they were doing during this Tuskegee study.
Jeez.
Yeah. So that's 1, 2, and 3. What do you think, Vlad?
Okay.
I can see the wheels turning in your brain right now.
Repeat the second one to me.
The second one? Okay.
Yeah.
The study originally had 600 patients, but over the course of 40 years, this would evolve into a total of over 2,000 patients. I say patients, I mean participants. So.
I kind of want to say it's that one.
You think it's that one?
Yeah, I don't know why. I think it's that one. Yeah.
You sure?
Yeah. Because okay, so I don't really have an explanation because all of it seems legit, and you could very easily tell me that all of them are true, and I believe it too.
Yeah. Which I've actually considered doing one episode just to kind of mess with you guys, but obviously I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, thank you. But I think it's that one just because I feel like it'd be very easy to just give me wrong numbers.
Yeah?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, of course, numbers are easy to mess with. I mean, but I could have done the same thing with the 606 formula. What if it's a 303? You don't know. You have no idea. What if that's not the name of it at all?
That's true.
What if I'm just trying to mislead you right now?
No, you're completely right.
I'm very good about that.
I still think it's the second one.
You still think it's the second one?
Yeah.
I'm going to lock you into it. You sure?
Do it.
All right. I'm going to lock you into the second one. So you're saying you do not believe that the study expanded from 600 participants to over 2,000?
I believe it.
All right.
Or I don't believe it.
There we go.
That's more accurate.
There we go. All right. I'm going to go ahead and lock you in on that one.
All right.
So as always, I like to do some research. I decided what better way than to actually look into syphilis? What is syphilis? And I'm going to start by saying this. I never thought I'd do as much research into STDs as I ever did. And yes, I'm saying STDs, not STIs, because I got all this information from the CDC website. So can it? I don't want to hear it because I get a lot of crap about that. I do. But the syphilis, it's an STD that can lead to, a variety of serious consequences if left untreated. However, due to modern technology, it's very simple to cure with the right treatment. Today, one of the first treatments that were used was penicillin. It's kind of almost like a cure-all for a lot of bacterial infections and diseases at the time. But penicillin is a powerhouse drug. I mean, it can take care of a lot. But if the syphilis is left untreated, progression of syphilis can evolve into between 4 stages, which is segmented between the primary, which is what most people have before they get treatment, secondary, which is what some people can still reach to because sometimes you don't always show symptoms, latent, which is where you show absolutely no symptoms at all, you have no idea, and then tertiary. Tertiary is the final stage and very few people get to there, but we're going to get to that one in a sec. The primary stage, is often, categorized by, having one or more sores, spotted at the original site of infection, whether it be oral, genital, or, rectal, it can be found on or even inside these cavities, this is where you can get lesions and pussy sores, which aren't often painful, but they're very firm and very round and easy to kind of identify.
Okay.
The secondary stage is this is where you get your rashes, your swollen lymph nodes, and even fevers can be severe during this time. But during both of these stages, you don't always show symptoms. You don't always show signs. So not everybody always gets these symptoms. So they don't always know, because sometimes they'll even be mild and misdiagnosed as something else. One thing I saw, especially if you see these sores around the mouth, some doctors or even patients just wrote it off as like herpes, and that was it.
Yeah, you can kind of see how that would happen.
Yeah, and then obviously in the latent stage, there's no symptoms, that you see or anything at this time. And then comes the tertiary stage. This stage is what, when you think of syphilis and how it rots your brain and everything, this is the stage where most of that typically happens. It's associated with several medical problems that affect the heart, the brain, and other vital organs. Most people usually, like I said, they don't develop these symptoms, but they can develop 10 to 30 years after being infected if you go untreated. Yeah, so this is a problem that can last a lifetime, but you can go so long without showing symptoms, you'll never know the damage it's doing to you. I mean, in other...
It's kind of scary.
Yeah, in other research that I found, I mean, there are cases where it can eat away flesh and, even take away your nose sometimes. Yeah, it makes you go crazy. You'll see movies, especially if it's a period dated movie that deals with syphilis and all that. You see all these people who just get sent to madhouses because people thought they were crazy, and at this point they understood that syphilis can make you go crazy, but they kind of thought, especially with women, that was really the only answer needed. And obviously this led to a lot of malpractice and other things that are probably worth its own episode. Yeah. Without treatment, obviously, the possibility of syphilis spreads increases, and we can get 2 different types of syphilis depending on where it spreads. If it goes to the brain, this is where sufferers have what's known as neurosyphilis, or if it goes to the eyes, you have what's known as ocular syphilis. With the eyes, you can go from just having fuzzy vision to being completely blind. And with neurosyphilis, you can have a variety of symptoms that ranges from severe headaches to paralysis to getting numb to even suffering dementia and even having difficulty coordinating your muscles and everything. It's also important to know both of these, the neurosyphilis and the ocular syphilis, this can happen at any stage, primary to tertiary. So this is an interesting thing that we'll see later on that goes into the thought process with people involved in the study. So syphilis is also important to understand. Syphilis can spread from a pregnant mother to their unborn child. This can have a variety of complications, with the child possibly being born premature, being born underweight, or even being stillborn, as in, being born dead.
Yeah.
A child can be born without these symptoms, but if not treated immediately, then serious problems can develop in only a few weeks. These babies can develop cataracts, deafness, or even get seizures and simply die, just out of nowhere. And often it might be written off as SIDS if the test isn't done.
Yeah.
So it's a variety of problems that can happen, and you did see a lot of this happen, later on in the study. Like I said, treatment is simple. A lot of recommendations I said is, just get tested regularly. It's not hard.
Yeah.
There's still an active stigma, especially for guys, to get tested, and I wish that wasn't the case, because you never know what you're spreading. There are diseases that affect women more than men, but this is one that can actually affect both equally. I never thought I'd be given this PSA, but with the kind of friends and people I know in my life, it's kind of important information to tell people. So get yourself tested regularly, because even if you had syphilis once, you can still get it again. It's important to understand. Even if you treat it, even if you're cleared, you can still get it again. It's like the cold. Just because you have it once doesn't mean you'll never get it again. And especially with coronavirus and everything going on right now, it's important to educate people that even if you have it once, the possibility is you can get it again. But we're not talking about that today.
Yeah.
So,
of course.
But it's just important information. So let's get into the study.
Okay.
So in 1928, there in Norway, they would conduct a study of their own that was known as the Oslo Study of Untreated Syphilis. There, they reported the pathologic manifestations of untreated syphilis in several hundred white men. It's important to know that this was a study conducted where they asked, the patients about their medical history, signs of their symptoms and everything. They didn't observe them through the whole time. These men voluntarily gave their information. So that's important to understand, because when the U.S. Public Health Service syphilis study at Tuskegee wanted to build on the study, they did it with the prospective approach to complement the Oslo study, which means that they started with a base group and observed them as time went on. The study first formed its group of researchers under Taliaferro Clark in collaboration with the Tuskegee Institute, which is now known as the Tuskegee University, which is a historically black college in Alabama. Clark's original vision for the study would only last 6 months to 1 year of observation and be followed up with treatment. Sounds great.
Yep.
It's like, yes, it's important to study these, to study the effects and then obviously treat these guys later. But I wouldn't be talking about it if that happened. Later on, the treatment was deemed too expensive and dropped as part of the study when the Rosenwald Fund withdrew support. Real quick, the Rosenwald Fund was started up by a guy named John Rosenwald, who would later go on to be a CEO of Sears and stuff like that. So just big billionaire with a lot of money.
This dude has money.
Yeah,
All
but
right.
he's pretty much unrelated. Clark was still interested in the study, as he wanted to see if there was any difference in how the disease affected African Americans versus Caucasians, as a prevailing theory at the time stated that Caucasians were more likely to develop neurosyphilis and African Americans were more likely to develop cardiovascular problems, which, side note, found out is not true. Clark would later resign from the study before the first expansion of the long-term study even took place. So before the 6-month period was done, he had already resigned. But most people still associate this to him since he's the one who started the study. Which I think is a little unfair, because when you do your research, I mean, yes, he had, his own racist views at the time. He had his own opinions, but he's not the one who drove all the unethical studies and practices. He may have started it, but he's not the one who gave it its infamy. It's important to know that throughout the study, researchers would reason that they would not be harming the men involved under the presumption that they were very unlikely to get treatment in the first place. Yeah, very fucked up thinking.
Wow. Yeah.
At the time, however, every major medical textbook would recommend treatment of some variety, whether it be some form of arsenic therapy or even the 606 formula. Side note, the 606 formula, also known as arsphenamine, that's why I couldn't pronounce that word, arsphenamine, salvarsan, or compound 606. This organoarsenic compound was the first antimicrobial agent used and introduced in the beginning of the 1910s as an effective treatment for syphilis. So this is when it was first introduced. So they still had treatment options, but like I said, this was still very, toxic. This was still had only mild results. It could help, but it was not a guarantee. Even though they felt justified in the study as it would benefit humankind, they were determined, obviously, to have done irreparable harm, leading to the study being characterized as, quote, the longest non-therapeutic experiment on human beings in medical history, unquote. Now that's fucking saying something, It's just... Sorry, some of the pictures and everything I saw and the things I read about this, it just blows my mind. Granted, with the context of the time, I can unfortunately understand where they were coming from.
When did this happen again?
This started in 1932. It didn't end until 1972. So 40 years.
40 years of this shit.
And it was supposed to only last 6 months to a year.
Wow.
So keep that in mind. Yeah, it's a lot. It's hard to just, it's hard to understate that or overstate that. In total, 399 infected individuals who were in the latent stage, and 201 uninfected men would participate under the assumption that they were receiving treatment for what was known as quote-unquote bad blood, which was a colloquial term at the time that referred to a variety of conditions. Now, these conditions ranged from syphilis to anemia to fatigue to all kinds of problems. At the time, the uneducated public didn't have an understanding of STDs or other physical ailments, and they didn't understand what was what. So bad blood was kind of just a catch-all term that they used, which made it easy to convince these patients to undergo these studies since they were uneducated. They didn't know what they were doing, which is going to lead to a lot of the biggest ethical problems, consent, because they didn't have an informed consent. They cannot justifiably accept the study, But we'll get into that later on. Real quick, the most influential man in this study, the one who I personally think is mostly at fault, is a man by the name of Thomas Perrin Jr. He would take over as the head of the study and like I said, arguably more responsible for the unethical treatments than Clark. Perrin, in an effort to expand his research, would lead the study in Guatemala for 2 years. Will lead a study, I should say, in Guatemala for 2 years while the Tuskegee experiment was still very active. But we'll come back to that part, to kind of get back to Tuskegee.
Yeah.
As an incentive to get people to join the study, African Americans were offered free meals, free medical exams, and even burial insurance. Yeah, which is a very powerful chip to give to somebody, especially in an impoverished community. You don't have to worry if you die. We'll cover it. You think about it now. It's like 6 to 10 grand it costs to bury somebody in a casket and have the whole funeral and everything. It's a fucking scam. When I die, look, I'm going to say this right now. When I die, just throw me in the dirt. I don't care. I don't. If you want to make it nice and ceremonial, I don't shove my body full of seeds, make a tree grow out of me. I don't care. I couldn't die happy knowing that I'm about to, put my family 6 to 10 grand in debt, just trying to bury me.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense.
You're right, it is a scam.
It is, but, we'll probably cover death and everything in another episode because it is something I have been researching because, oh boy, there's a lot of interesting information I found about embalming. But, later episode. It was found after nearly 40 years later that these men were, like I said, unable to give their uninformed consent as they had been misled about the study and the disease that they had. They were never told that they had syphilis throughout this whole study. Eunice Rivers would be a crucial element to the study as she was the African-American nurse who had a direct link to the community that they were pulling these people from and made it easier to convince participants to stay. She was the only person to participate the full length of the study, so all 40 years. As many of the other white researchers, they would come in and come out and focus on other things. I should also say I didn't write it in my notes, but this study was public. This study was published in medical textbooks and everything. But obviously, the American public isn't just all going to read medical textbooks all the time. So that's a big reason why it went unnoticed. Especially in the community that they were in, they already had a lower literacy rate than most people. So, of course, even if they had the medical textbooks, it would do them no good.
Yeah, nobody was paying attention.
Exactly. Yeah. So even though the information was out there, nobody was looking at it, and that's, a big reason that this was able to go on for so long.
Because nobody went and said, "Oh, this seems a little unethical,"
Just a little? Oh, yeah, but I mean, you're right though. Nobody stepped in and really put their foot down and say like, "No, this can't happen." We did have people who periodically came in who took notice and would express their concerns, but more often than not, they were quashed, just outright. Nobody wanted to deal with it, and, when the government's telling you, no, we're going to go ahead with this, most people tend to shut up, But getting back to Eunice, she was even able to get participants to agree to have their bodies undergo autopsies when they died in exchange for the burial insurance. She would also lead a lot of these men to coming into what they called Miss Rivers Lodge, which was where they held the study in the Tuskegee Institute. This is where they would get their free meals, get these treatment options, which was all for show. None of it was real. No. They would do blood draws, spinal taps. They would, of course, take blood pressure and everything, and they would say that this is part of the treatment for bad blood, but most of these things were very ineffective and just for show. They would give placebos of a variety, of effects, or even intentionally mislead them about what they were doing about certain studies on a few men here and there. But it was just so much specific things that I just kind of didn't cover it just because it is worth knowing, but if I just took the time to write down every little detail that they did about this would be 20 pages long. So just kind of throwing that out there. Obviously, during this time, World War II happened, and there would be a draft. During this draft, 250 of the infected men in the study would join the war effort, but as they had syphilis, they would be examined, and the syphilis would be noted on their medical charts. This was a problem because then that means they would be told of the disease that they had, and so the researchers had to convince the U.S. Army to tell to not tell the patients that they had syphilis, as it would ruin their study. And the U.S. Army agreed.
Wow.
Yeah.
Of course, the U.S. Army agreed.
Yeah.
That's so scummy. That's
It's horrible. That's what it is. It's just it blows my mind. But at the same time, it's arguably a much more racist time, and it is World War II. It was one of the biggest wars anybody's fought. So I can kind of understand why they were easy to be like, yeah, I'm okay. I hear you. Let's just get them out into the field because we need men on the front lines. So I can kind of get it, but at the same time, I don't like, trying to rationalize their views, because it's just like, what the fuck, man?
Yeah.
But like, I get it. I do get it, It just sucks. It's just one of those things that's like, there's no good way out of this, Because even if they were told they had syphilis, they were still going to war, and most likely they were going to die on the battlefield. So syphilis was kind of the least of their concerns at the same time. During the war effort, after the war effort in 1947, when syphilis became the standard treatment for syphilis, the participants were never informed about this, and they were never given penicillin to see how it would treat their latent and tertiary stages. So obviously the study continued. By the end of the study, only 74 men were still alive. 28 had died due to syphilis directly, and 100 died due to related complications. 40 of the wives of the infected individuals got infected themselves, and 19 of their children were born with congenital syphilis. So now you can kind of see the long-term effects of what happened. They didn't just fuck over 600 guys. They fucked over their wives and their kids too. And this is a problem that people still suffer today. A lot of the descendants of the men who were part of the study still suffers a lot of stigma today because of it. In their communities, and I saw reports of them being isolated, and they just don't like talking to a lot of people, and they stick to themselves a lot. Yeah, it's pretty bad. But kind of, since we're still in the post-World War II era, let's go ahead and go back to Guatemala. From 1946 to 1948, the U.S. Would conduct human experiments on Guatemalans, infecting the vulnerable population with the disease by way of using prostitutes or other indirect contact methods, such as, giving them food or drinks that would be contaminated and stuff.
So they were purposely poisoning people.
They were purposely infecting them. Yes.
Yeah.
It was not just, hey, these guys are infected, let's just look at them. It's like, no, let's infect the population because there's no law saying we can't. Yeah.
They're innocents.
Yeah, exactly. And this is where, both are equally bad in my views, but for different reasons. Obviously, for the Tuskegee study, is the longevity and the misinformation and the malpractice because of that is why that one's bad. But for this one, is the direct infection and inhumane actions done onto the Guatemalan people was just mind-blowing. But it just... Even the Guatemalans are still suffering, effects to this day by it. In total, 83 would actually die in this 2-year period, ranging from soldiers to orphans. Yeah, they did not care. They got everyone, And in 2010, President Barack Obama, his Secretary of State, and his Secretary of Health and Human Services would give a formal apology to Guatemala and those infected during the experiments. And I believe they even had an undisclosed amount settlement for those infected. Kind of similar to how news broke about the Tuskegee study, there were reporters and everything who would look into this and go to Guatemala and talk to these people. There is a lawyer in Guatemala and a lawyer in the United States who were coordinating with each other to file the lawsuit against the United States for the settlement for those who suffered because of it. Yeah. And keep in mind, a lot of the men who were responsible for this, they went untouched. Like nothing happened to them. They were able to keep their current jobs. They were able to live a normal life, more or less without scrutiny. It's just it sucks. It's incredibly not fair. It's horrible. Because one thing I'll touch on Thomas Parent Jr. when I finish this, because there's a little bit of extra information, a little unrelated, but kind of related, and you'll see what I mean when we get there. But of course, at some point, news broke out to the public. This came away by a man named Peter Buxton, who in 1966 he was a PHS venereal disease, which is public health service. He was the Public Health Service venereal disease investigator who wrote his concerns on the study to the CDC, who at this point was in charge of the study. The CDC would reaffirm their position on the study to continue until all subjects had died and had been autopsied. Yeah. Buxton, after a few years, finally went to the press, and the story first broke in the Washington Star on July 25th, 1972. Due to the rising public pressure, the study was terminated later that year in November, I believe. They formally said that they were going to terminate it in October, so roughly sometime in November is when it officially ended. But I don't have the exact date, as I found a few conflicting reports. The U.S. government agreed to pay $10 million at the time, which today in 2019 would be, adjusted for inflation, was $51.8 million to the survivors and the participants, their descendants affected as a consequence of the study. I believe to this day there's 11 people still receiving compensation from this. So, as all the men have died so far, I believe the last one died in 2004. The last widow died in 2009. Yeah, and on May 16th, 1997, President Bill Clinton would give a formal apology to the survivors and the participants' family. And there's a whole... it's like a half hour long and everything, and I watched it, and it's not hard to watch, but I watched that after looking at everything, and so it just kind of hit different, I didn't cry, but I could definitely feel like I could,
Yeah. I know what you mean. But it's awful that like this.
It's horrible and it's inhumane.
Honestly, man, like the United States has such a history.
It's a fucked up place.
We have a history of so many like shady stuff that's, by the way, approved by the government
all the time. MK Ultra is one of our biggest examples of inhumane experimentation for a reason.
The worst thing is like all this stuff has been confirmed, and I honestly don't blame people for coming up with crazy conspiracy theories
because when you look at the truth of what actually happened in some cases, wow.
It's I totally get where you're coming from. I also would not believe the moon landing was real at this point.
I've also looked into the science and practicality behind it, so that's why I obviously still believe it.
Yeah, no, obviously the moon landing happened.
Yeah,
but
I get what you're going with this.
Yeah, it's the amount of all the time.
The amount of misinformation and just blatant abuses of power it's unprecedented. And people, even today, where they still say trust our government and everything, I'm like, are you insane? We have over 200 years of evidence to say why we shouldn't trust our government right now. God, it's a headache and a half. But to kind of go back quick to the Thomas Perrin Jr. point I was going to talk about real quick.
Yeah.
A little bit of extra information I found about him. Was that he had formed a division in the university that he worked at the time that studied specifically diseases and venereal diseases and STDs and everything. So that way the American Sexually Transmitted Disease Board or whatever it was called, they actually named an award after him. They named an award after this guy called the Thomas Perrin Jr. Award for breakthroughs in medical research and development in STD diseases, in sexually transmitted diseases. It wasn't until 2012, I didn't write in my notes, so I'm kind of pulling it from my head. I believe it was 2012, 2013 or something like that, where they finally decided we need to repeal his name and change the name of the award. So now it's the ASTDP award or something like that. Stands the acronym for the institute in which it's from.
Yeah.
But like I said, he from what I read didn't really suffer a lot of consequences from this.
Despite him being kind of at the head of this.
Yeah. It's crazy, man.
To
kind of go back to your point, because I did want to bring something up with just mistrust and everything, because there's a variety of information that I did glance over, but with the mistrust and everybody has with their government and everything, kind of reminded me of Operation Sea Breeze. If you don't know, Operation Sea Breeze was part of the MK Ultra experiment, where they literally sprayed LSD in over the San Francisco's Golden Gate Bridge, and the winds carried this into the public. Yeah, that was something I found out, just kind of to distract me from this research for a bit.
I love how casually America just
they just don't care.
It's just hey, let's spread diseases across the nation, across other nations. Let's just commit war crimes. Yes.
Yeah, dude, after World War II, whenever we dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Americans went and found the survivors and studied them for 20 plus years to study radiation effects, and again suffered no consequences because of how they did so.
I think another thing is we always to justify things with things
well, America as a whole, especially in this last century, we've been very ends justify the means kind of deal. We reason away things to get to this end point without thinking how fucked up we got to get along the way. The study being a very big example of it. Like I was talking about with Eunice Rivers, this is a part that I also see people, argue a lot back and forth online. Some people, kind of agree with how she took it because she was getting paid. She was part of this study. She stayed for the whole thing. She was the only participant to stay for the whole thing, which is a reason why people don't like her, especially. But she was the reason why they were able to get so many people from the start. She was the reason why people, joined up, because it sounded great. You got a black woman coming to you in a black community telling you, hey, we're going to give you free meals, free medical exams, and burial insurance if you come participate in the study. It's going to sound a lot more appealing than some white asshole like me telling you that, in 1932 in rural Alabama. So
it's all scummy all around.
It is. But at the same time, this kind of goes into something, a different unethical experiment. A point I saw brought up online in a forum discussing this. One guy brought up the Milgram experiments, which, if you don't know what that is, was another unethical experiment, which was looking to examine the people's obedience versus willpower, to defy authority figures. The Milgram experiment, to kind of quickly just run down, was the experiment where you had the observer, the participant, and then the subject, who they would be asked questions. If they got it wrong, which intentionally they would be electrocuted, air quotes.
I've heard about this.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. It's pretty popular. It's pretty well known. Because it was incredibly fucked up. Because you had over 65% of people who would administer the highest voltage, administering what they believed to be the highest amount of pain, simply because an authority figure told them to do so, and ignore it. People did it without question or hesitation. If there were people who did question or hesitate, the authority figure would push harder, and say, just do it. It's part of the experiment. They agreed. Don't worry. It doesn't matter. Stuff like that. Just to get them to do it, to see if they would do it. And a lot of people still did. Very few people had the willpower to be like, no, I'm not doing this. That man's getting hurt. Obviously the man wasn't getting hurt. The subject that they believed that they were asking questions to was not hooked up to anything. They would just fake screams and everything. So,
wow,
yeah.
So it just shows how easily
it shows how powerful and influential authority is in our lives and our willingness to obey. When there's an authority figure in our lives, we're more likely to just follow instead of outright question and defy, because it's easier to do. Especially in children, they're raised under the mentality of parents know best. But this mentality does carry on into our adult lives with our bosses, our friends, our teachers, whatever. So that's a big reason I saw somebody bring up, and something I can kind of agree with Eunice, because Eunice did know that these men had syphilis. She was willingly lying to them, saying that they all had bad blood. She was willingly deceiving these men to undergo these studies and observations, and these the spinal taps. Every time I think about it, my back hurts, because I've never had one, but I can just imagine, because I've looked at what it takes to get those spinal taps. Those needles are not small; they are huge. And the reason that they had to do the spinal taps is goes into the neurosyphilis, because they were trying to see how far the syphilis would spread throughout the nervous system and everything. The only way you can do that is extract it from the spinal column. And oh god, it's just it gives me the willies, and I don't like it. But I mean, it's just crazy. And a lot. I also didn't explain in when I was doing the research. A lot of these studies were also done without anesthetics too. The blood draws, the spinal taps, all these other procedures.
I could not imagine.
They were done because there was a prevailing theory, and something that we even struggle today, which I found out, was a really archaic belief that black people don't feel pain, which is obviously wrong. We know that it's wrong.
Very wrong.
It is wrong, and it's a thing that I saw still today. I saw reports of little girls who were in extreme pain because they weren't given an anesthetic for a procedure that they went into the doctors for. This is not something that happened in the 1950s. This was a report I saw in 2010. And it just blows my mind. That even today we still have things like this. We know better, so why are we not doing better? And I guarantee you, there's probably some other fucked up practice going on right now that we don't know about yet.
Yeah,
I guarantee it, and I'm just irritated.
Yeah, it's really messed up, and the fact that it just goes to show, years of progress might happen, but people are still going to be...
Well, yeah, but that also goes to the question of, does the ends justify the means? Just because we learned doesn't mean we didn't do irreparable damage along the way.
That's right, we did. We absolutely did.
It's just...
You can't fix that. You can't fix the past.
No, you can't, and it's just... I'm getting heated because, I don't know. I read a bunch of these stories, and I have to decide which is going to be a good episode. And there's a lot of other stories who either may be more well-known, and I just did my research and I'll know a little bit more, or there may be others that I feel would be better down the line. But, it's all boiling down to the same basic problems, we just do fucked up things for fucked up reasons, and there's no reason for it,
Oh,
You're good.
I was going to add, Which one did I get wrong? Right.
No, you got it right.
Okay,
you
just
did.
making sure. Just making sure.
You did.
I got the numbers. All right. Yeah. All right.
Yeah. So,
All right. Because
I was really trying to mislead you with that one.
Yeah.
I'm really hoping I can convince you not to. But
I mean,
yeah, I knew you were gonna get it.
When I heard the answers, I was just like,
I mean, but you could see that happening though.
I could see it happening. That's the worst thing. I guess it just comes to show, like, I wasn't too surprised.
Yeah, exactly. It's crazy. But I mean, at this point, I could just keep ranting on about all the problems and unethical practices of everything I've researched so far, and at that point, I might as well have a different podcast for just rants. I know this was a shorter episode, but at the same time, like I said, I didn't want to get to a point where it was just listing off all the fucked up things that happened, because this could have been 20 pages long. This could have been 3 hours worth of discussions. But a lot, like I said, a lot of the same things that happened in the Tuskegee study also did happen in Guatemala. With the individuals there. May have been for a shorter time, but it most certainly happened. So that's the reason why I didn't go too far in depth with the Guatemala studies, as it was related. But yeah, that was the Tuskegee Syphilis study. Really fucked up shit. History always is, especially when you look at racial practices and stuff like this. It's unavoidable. It's unquestionable. It happened, and we can't deny it. And it amazes me today that we still have people who try to deny crap like this. But this is America. We're full of idiots, and we're full of our self-entitled beliefs to our rights, and it's crazy. But that was it. I like I said, I can keep going on, but at this point, I'm kind of like just heated from everything. So
yeah, it's an intense subject.
Yeah, it is intense, and it's especially being the guy who has to ask the questions. What led to this? What led to this? How is this related? And you got to go down other rabbit holes and see other fucked up shit related to this.
Yeah,
it just adds to it, and it weighs on me. But next week we are going to be covering another experiment, but not a biomedical one. We're going to be studying one that happens in the mind. We're going to be studying something that I was very fascinated with when I took my psychology classes in high school. Very fucked up ideas on trying to ask the question, what is love? So stay tuned for that one.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think you guys might enjoy that one.
Okay.
So if the audience, you already know kind of where that one's going to lead to, keep your mouth shut, because everyone else probably doesn't. But that's it for me. We're going to go ahead and head out. We got some other things to work on behind the scenes. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. We'll be back next week. Hope to see you there. Bye.
Bye.